Hello there, dear viewers, and welcome to attaQ. My name is Jakob. I'm your host, and you're watching a attaQ episode. And in this episode, well, it's a top list of synthesizers from 2021, but it's not just my top list, it's also yours. A few months ago, I put out this video in where I was asking you about your favorites, and I went through all of your comments and I picked out 5 synthesizers that were talked about the most, the ones that were mentioned the most, the ones that you liked the most. And it turns out that you and I pretty much have the same favorites. So I put those 5 in a poll and I asked you again, which one do you like the most? And it turns out that attaQ Z was the one that won. It's an amazing synthesizer, and if you have seen my attaQ Z video, you know I love it. But is it my most favorite one? No. So which is it? Well, you're seeing it right here. It's called ID700. Now, before we begin, I just want to say that I don't want this video to be too long, and what I'm going to do is highlight 1 or 2 things in the synthesizer that I really like about it. So ID700, modeled after the Buchla 700, a synthesizer that is based on FM and wavetable synthesis, not wavetable, what is it called? Wave shaping synthesis. Now, apart from 2 wave shaping oscillators, it also has 4 FM operators. It's got a very, very interesting sound to it. Now, the thing I love the most about this thing is actually how the envelope works. You see, a conventional envelope usually has 4 controls: attaQ, decay, sustain, release. And then there are synthesizers with some more intricate controls like slope controls, and there are some that even have a hold in there. And yeah, there are many types of envelopes, but they're pretty much the same and they're not more interesting than that. Well, in this case, the envelope is whatever you draw it to be, and you can actually give every single point in your envelope a command that it can perform when it reaches that point in the envelope. As you saw there, I was adding nodes by double tapping in the window, and as long as there is space for more nodes, you can actually add more of them. And I think that this is very cool. Now, in its default state, you have about from 0 to 32 seconds, but you can actually change the scaling of the envelope and every other time-based thing in here by pulling this thing here. It's called time scaling. And if we pull it up to 400, we can get up to 128 seconds, and we can even get it down to only 8 seconds. Keep in mind that this thing affects everything time-based in this synth. Now, another thing you can do with this envelope is you can curve it. The only thing I don't like with this curving feature is that you're pretty much getting an exponential curve on one side and a logarithmic curve on the other. And I would love it if I could have logarithmic curves on both sides or exponential curves on both sides. So that's an idea for the developer, but this is really cool, by the way. Another thing you can do with this envelope is, well, you can select a point in this envelope, and then you can give it a conditioned action. Now, over here we have a box. It says 0.6. That's because we are on 0.6. If I press this one, we're on 0.7. And if we go through here, we have a list of things that we can do. Now, here it says pause if key is down. And so it runs through the envelope and then stops and behaves like a sustain at that point. What else can we do? Well, the next one says stop if key is up. And so it will basically just stop at that point in the envelope when you lift the key. You've got more commands here like jump to point. And with this, you can actually turn your envelope into an LFO. Just for demonstration, I'm gonna send it to point 1 so you can see that. And now it loops. I love the unconventional structure of this envelope. So if you're working with pads or sound effects, anything along those lines, this is it's a perfect synthesizer for that. I absolutely love ID700. One point of warning though, this is very hard to get into if you're a synthesizer beginner, but anyone who is interested in sound design, then ID700 is definitely one you want to have a look at. Boom, Synthmaster 2 by KV331 Audio. It's a very powerful synthesizer, one of the most powerful synthesizers on the App Store actually, and it does so much. When it comes to modulation, it has almost everything you could possibly want, and when it comes to synthesis, it gives you a lot of possibilities through its different synth engines. Now, I love the sound of this thing, and it comes with many great sounds, but I'm never interested in that. I'm only interested in sounds that I can make, and I've spent a lot of time with this synthesizer. Now, what I like so much about this is that you can do a lot of different types of synthesis on it, and it's like the engines in here have been well thought out with its controls and everything. And you can find the synthesis engines by pressing up here in Type, where you have basic, and that's the one we're in right now, where it basically uses waveforms, and there's so many types of waveforms to choose from, and you can use samples and you can import waveforms and samples. There's a lot that can be done just with this engine alone. And then we also have additive synthesis, wavetable synthesis, vector synthesis, and audio in. Now, the vector synthesis pretty much work like the vector synthesis in something like iProfit. So you select 4 different waveforms, and these can pretty much be anything that you have in the synth, and then you just morph between them, and all of this can be modulated. So that's pretty cool. But that's not actually the one I like the most. What I like is that this synthesizer is so souped up, but you could just use it as an organ synthesizer. And all you have to do is to choose additive, and there you go. Now, this window up here basically becomes your drawbar, and you can pretty much set this up any way you want. You have up to 32 spots of harmonics that you can set for all of the waveforms, and then you just use these as drawbars. I just find that to be a really fun thing, to be able to really make this thing sound more Hammond-like, or, you know, like any other type of tone wheel organ. And considering the sheer amount of modulation that you can do in this thing, I think you've got about like 65 slots of modulation. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. Then again, this synthesizer can also sound like this. Okay, so here's the thing. Whenever I wanted to sit down and really just work on sound design, I chose either this one, Synthmaster 2 or ID700. But when it came to actually performing work or doing work, recording stuff, I always selected another synthesizer over this one, and it is... boom, Flow Tones by Tone Booster, or TB Flow Tones as it's called on the App Store. It feels like they wanted Flow Tones to be able to do anything. You see, Flow Tones also have two parts, just like Synthmaster does, and each part have two oscillators. Now, it's not like you have a serious amount of engines to work with. You have this one engine, but you can select various waveforms. But then you can also change how these waveforms are being read by the engine by selecting the engine type. And then on top of that, you also have PVM and phase. So there's many ways that you can actually manipulate the waveform and also modulate it at the same time to make it sound different. I have the feeling that they really did want this synthesizer to sound different than other synthesizers, and it really does. It has way more of a digital sound to it, but then it also has everything else you need. Full envelopes, a filter with a huge selection of filter types. You've got a modulation section with 3 envelopes and 4 LFOs. And then it's got a really nice FX section with 4 different types of effects in there. One of them being a formant filter that sounds absolutely amazing. And there's a heap of controls in here to actually shape that vocal sound. Now it's also got a distortion and a crush effect, and then it also has a built-in sequencer, and in the output you can actually do some mastering and some leveling. So you've got a VCA cap and you've got a limiter in here too. There's a lot of power in this synthesizer. This is why I kind of compare it to Synthmaster 2. Even though Flow Tones isn't as deep as Synthmaster 2, this thing can also do a whole lot and gives you a lot of depth into synthesis. The reason to why this became one of my favorite ones is because of how quick it is to work with. And one of the things I really like with this one is you get to modulate stuff without having to go to a modulation matrix or anything else. You see, you long press and let go and you get this. And people might recognize this from other synthesizers, Agonizer synthesizer being one of them. That's right, the synthesizer that me and Kai Aras made, it's got that same type of modulation. All of Kai's apps that has modulation has this type of modulation interface. I just love it when developers are thinking about stuff like this, making it easy and accessible to do complex things without having to break a sweat. Now you can pin it so it never disappears, and that way you can just play your synth and tweak at the same time. Great work on this, and I highly recommend it. And I would recommend this to even beginners because it's not too hard to get into. And on top of it, you can also change the way it looks by changing color schemes, and that's something that all of the Tone Boosters apps have, which is, you know, it's a nice gimmick. The next one on my list shouldn't come as a surprise. It's attaQ Z. And I mean, if you've seen my video on attaQ Z, then you probably know why I love this thing so much. And I don't really want to repeat myself from what I said in that video. So if you haven't seen it, I suggest you go and watch it. But man, do I love this thing. It's got that same great sounding anisotropic sound engine as the original one, only it's in 3D now. And it just, oh, I just love this thing. This is ridiculous. It's so easy to get distracted. one of the things that I do enjoy, apart from, being able to draw shapes in here, is the fact that attaQ Z is one of those synthesizers that give you an unprecedented amount of control over the modulation of wave tables, because that's basically what attaQ is. It's a wave table player, wavetable synth, and you've got 8 wavetables with 16 waveforms in each wavetable, and they're now produced not only on this grid but also on the grid upwards, like if you fold up a laptop, so it's in a 3D space, and every note that you play is a comet that follows a path, and that in itself is modulation. And then you can modulate the comet and the path that the comet take around nodes, so you can get different types of orbits. That is also modulation. And then I did demonstrate how you could map the picture in here, this thing, you can actually map this to MIDI and have this move around. And I did that in my video with LFOs, and that is also modulation. And on top of that, you have 10 modulation slots where you can do more modulation. There's an unprecedented amount of modulation. That's the strength of attaQ Z, and that is what I love so much about it. And everyone should try out attaQ Z if they haven't yet. It's an amazing synthesizer. Boom! The last one is Polywave by Fingerlab and Jordan Rudess. Now, this is a wavetable synth too, just like attaQ. And a huge difference in this one compared to something like attaQ is that you only have this one wavetable, and here you can make unique waveforms for each and every one of the 16 waveforms in your wavetables. And then you can have them play in sequence. And that sequence can be manipulated, and it can be tied to start from the beginning of the sequence with each note, or it can be untied so that every note has a different start in the sequence, which makes it very interesting. And if you want to know more, then I do suggest you go and watch my video on it, and also hear what Jordan Rudess had to say about the making of this synth. I think it's a shame that not more people tried out Polywave, because it does really have an interesting way of functioning, and there's some more hidden stuff in here. It's not really hidden, but yeah, it's kind of hidden, because you can also automate the sequences and the way that it works with volume and many other things in here. It's a very interesting synthesizer, and it deserves an extra look. An honorable mention is Shaper synthesizer. Now, for any beginners out there, this is a synthesizer I would definitely recommend to you, because there's a lot you can do with it, while at the same time also having a synthesizer that is very basic in its layout. Not simplistic, but simple to use. Very, very effective little interface here, and it works on iPhone and iPad. It won't set you back much either. It's a great synthesizer, it sounds great, and it does actually have some proper power in it. Stay tuned for the next top list, which is going to be about, well, I'll keep it a secret until then. Now, before you leave, just give me a thumbs up, and if you didn't like the video, just give me a thumbs down. If you want to support the work I do in this channel, then sharing this video is also really helpful. And if you want to support me in a financial way, go check out my music first. Full list of links down below. And I've also got Patreon and PayPal, and if you don't want to do any of it, then that's okay too. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.